Howdy, Brainiacs. My name's Nat, and welcome to today's webinar on Neuromyths. We are going to be learning what's true, what's untrue, what might be true, what could be true, and how things have been distorted and contorted and confused and intermingled and mingled through hundreds of years. What do we know about the brain? What do we know about the brain to be true? What do we know about the brain that might not be true in a few years' time? There's lots of myths that we are going to be debunking today. Myths that are false, myths that are actually true, and myths that have a little kernel of truth in them, which more often than not is absolutely the case. So while today we're predominantly going to be focusing on the dyslexia, dyspraxia, the autism, the ADHD, honestly, it's the brain in total we're going to be looking at, because that is a thing that has been very, very misunderstood for a very, very long amount of time. There's some of these things that you may know to be true or think to be true. There might be things that your mother or your grandmother used to tell you from early childhood, and you never thought to second guess it, or you always wondered in the corner of your head. Maybe you know it's not true, but you do wonder if there's something about it which possibly might have something to it. Those are all the questions we're going to be diving in deep today. As always, this is Exceptional Individual. We're a neurodivergent support agency that supports neurodiverse people get high employment. We also work with organizations to help them with inclusivity and reworking their systems to allow more exceptional minds to enter the workforce. Here's us, lovely peeps. Today, we've got myself delivering. We've got April recording and editing, and we also have Kinga, who is viewing today. Now, the last webinar we did, which I know a lot of you did attend, and great if you did, but no worries if you didn't, was on neurodiversity fake news. Now, you might think, how is this one any different from last week? Well, last week we were mainly focusing on how these myths are sent around the world. For instance, we only use 10% of our brain. Males are more likely to have ADHD, or, people with dyslexia read backwards. Okay, well, it's all well and good proving them false, but why do people believe them in the first place? We learn it's around different news channels about how media kind of changes facts. We also learned that it's not typically done in a malicious way. Typically, you have hardcore academic research, then teachers will try and simplify it for their younger students. Then the media has to kind of convert it again for an audience which probably knows absolutely nothing. And over times where things get lost, things get mitigated, things get changed, eventually what you end up with is vaccines called autism. Obviously not true. Well, it's definitely not true. But these things take so long to get rid of. How do you shake them off? Hopefully we'll look at that today. So neuromyths, what are they and how can we combat them? Well, neuro, brain, myths, may be true, maybe not. And that is an interesting thing, right? A myth. Can a myth be true? I would say yeah, or at least it maybe was true at one point in time. Were there ever unicorns? I don't know. Maybe one day an ice cream cone fell on a horse. Someone took a picture and they were like, absolutely, it's real. And then from there, it just kind of grew. Who knows? But most of these things do come from a true origin. So let's start off. Where are we getting today's information from? Well, we have got it from a number of sources, and I've referenced wherever I'm able to. But a book that was particularly of interest today, which was a nice little read, was The Tall Tales About the Mind and the Brain by Sergio Delio Salva. I probably butchered the name, but it's a really good book, and I do recommend it if you think today is interesting. So this is a book that I'm basing a lot of today's on, or at least the initial research, but I have tried to back up everything with more recent stats of the last couple of years. Because wouldn't it be bad if we end up spreading fake news as well? To be honest, it's possible, but we've done absolutely everything we could in order to mitigate those possible chances. So let's start with a nice open question. What brain myths have you heard? Are there any myths or things that you heard to be true that you know not to be true, or you think are true, but you think maybe they're not? Any myths you heard of? An example is the classic one, we only use 10% of our brain, but there are many, many, many other myths. And interesting heads up, quite a few months ago, I actually did a version of this webinar for my colleagues, and it was actually quite contentious. There was a lot of people who, despite the facts, really disagreed with what the findings were. So even if you disagree with things which I debunked today, let me know. Let's have a discussion about it. All right, let's see. We tend to use energy through a quarter of our brains. Oh, yep, interesting. Not true. Our brains are using every little section of it, but we will get to that. 8 hours for the best sleep. Debatable. I mean, it's one of those things. Where does it even come from? I'm trying to get fit lately and I'm using a Fitbit and they say you should get 10,000 steps a day. But do you really need 10,000 steps a day? No. I was looking at the research. There ain't no research. It was some Japanese company yonks ago which just made it up. Research is saying maybe about 4,500, maybe 7,000 is completely adequate. But the number just doesn't sound as catchy, does it? Therapy only gets you to accept things, not change them. Of course, that's not true. But maybe I think it depends. We've got the brain is not plastic. Well, it's not made out of McDonald's toys for certain, but it definitely can change. It definitely can adapt. And brand new, hot off the press research is neuroplasticity means our brain can adapt and we can create new neurons. Maybe not rapidly, but we can do it. Male and female brains are different. This one is talked about all the time. Maybe there are slight differences, but not the differences that we talk about. Oh yeah, I realize I probably should have introduced myself a bit fuller. For those of you who do not know, I'm neurodivergent myself, and I'm also doing my master's in neuroscience. So that is where this expertise is hopefully coming from. All right, let's also see what we got. The most recent myth I heard last week is that ADHD brain is caused by a deficit of dopamine in the brain. Well, that's an interesting one because it's not the full story, but like most of these things today, there is truth into it. It can be partially due to a deficit of dopamine. It could be the dopamine not getting there fast enough, not enough quantity. We've done different sessions on this. So true, but there's much more to the story. You also can have an abundance of dopamine. So it can work both ways. You can have too much or not enough. But yeah, more complicated than that one would seem. We'll leave that one for another day, though. What else have we got? Okay, great stuff. Okay, really interesting. And we are definitely going to be tackling some of these myths today. Next question to all of you lovely people is, where do you learn about the brain? The things that you mentioned, who told them to you? Was it your mum? Was it Deirdre down the road? Was it on Facebook? Was it Twitter? Was it the newspaper? Was it academic journals? Where do you personally, or other people you know, learn these ridiculous facts? And I do encourage all of you to get interactive as much as you possibly are able to, because these sessions really do work better that way. All right, what we got? We've got old human body CD-ROM. Wow. I mean, I'm sure that needed a bit of dusting off, but yeah, I had one of those at school. Yeah, those pesky teachers always teaching us wrong facts. But as we learned from the previous session, they have to to get things in the syllabus takes time. And by the time it's in the syllabus, it's already pretty old. And they also have to mitigate and not include certain information. Colleagues, yep. You always round tea break, someone like, all right, here's a hot fact for you. Can't tell you where I remember it. I just know it to be true. We also got parents. Oh yeah, the amount of BS my mum taught me growing up. And I'm like, Mum, you completely screwed me over in life. She's like, that's what I always got taught. Bless her. We've got friends as well. Yep. Friends are always saying whatever pops in their head. Universities, absolutely. Yeah. Are they value for money? We'll see. We'll see about that. But there isn't any source which can be completely fact. Because, for instance, there's many peer-reviewed articles which have since been disproven, but were unanimously considered factual at the time. So myths can come from an array of sources. It's not just the Daily Mail and the Sun they can come from. They can come from even the top of the academic food chain. Oh, what else we got here? We've got a lot of teachers and professionals have a very stereotypical view of neurodiverse brains. They do. And the thing is, there's multiple perspectives and hats. You've got the kind of neurological side, neurodevelopmental side. You've got the concept of neurodiversity, the proof, the scientific proof of it, the psychological angle. It depends kind of what space you're coming from. and your particular definition. Yes, critics question everything. Very true. Never accept anything as fact. Always ask questions and always probe it. It's how we're able to kind of come up with these discoveries. Just remember, like, if you had autism originally, they thought it was more like schizophrenia, and they thought you were meant to be in an insane asylum. We've come a long way there, but we only come a long way because people were questioning it, people were poking it, people were prodding it, and they were saying, actually, we should probably look at this a little bit deeper. So, some neuro myths. What are things that are always cropping up all the time? We only use 10% of our brain. Not true. People think that we can only unlock that other little piece in our brain will be like X-Men and superheroes. I wish, but not through that way. We're left and right brain myth. Is one brain inherently creative? Is the other one more kind of analytical? That's something that we always think. You often people say, hey, I'm more left brain, I'm more right brain. The intelligence myth. Do people who are smarter have bigger brains? Interesting. Let's find out. Myths about neuroscience and education. Is there a correct way of teaching the leaders of tomorrow? Are learning styles even real? And how can we make our brain even better? If I'm playing some brain busting games on my Nintendo DS, will I get smarter? If I do Sudoku puzzles every day, is it going to stop me getting Alzheimer's? These are all myths that we hear time and time again. So let's kickstart with the first one. We only use 10% of our brain. And if we can unlock that 10%, think of what we can do. So there's like films like Limitless. There's also films like Lucy. There's lots of films that have played on this concept. And if you actually look at where this myth originated from, it's a little bit blurry. And I think originally it was just someone very broadly mentioning that we don't use all of our cognitive ability. They never mentioned a percentage. That came a lot later. So have you heard of this or have you not heard of this? So this is often what we call a feel-good myth. We love potential. We love superhero movies. We love the idea that one day we'll be better than we currently are without more work. If I said, if you did lots of revision and hard work, you would get smarter, oh, effort. But if I said somehow there's a way of quickly unlocking it, well, doesn't that sound appealing? So those of you who have never heard of it, it's pretty simple. It's that our brain is a big juicy bit of meat. And if you look at it, it's not overly active everywhere. So people think, well, maybe there's a reason it's there. We're just not using it. Now let's come to disproving these myths. So I want you to let me know if you think this is true or false. So for instance, damage to any part of the brain causes effects. So if you damage any part of the brain, bad stuff's going to happen. Every part of the brain is important. Is it true or false? Evolution supports the 10% myth. True or false? The brain is active in all areas. So no matter what you're doing, there's always something going on, and we don't fulfill 10% of our potential. Okay, interesting. So we've already, quite interestingly, we've got quite a mixed bag here, which does tell you how different our views and thoughts are. So let's have a quick look. We've got true, 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 false. Okay, I'll go over them. That one is wrong. Damage to any part of the brain causes effect. It is true. Now, obviously, there's a really interesting case of Phineas Gage, who was working on the railroad, and then an explosion happened, a big hole went up through his head, and lost a big chunk of the brain, and he lived. He was fine. So surely if he was fine, that part of the brain wasn't needed. But they later found out that he wasn't operating all so good. And because of that, his personality was different. He had changed outlooks on life. He just wasn't very pleasant. So we realized that even though some parts of the brain are more active in certain tasks, every part of the brain is needed. The next one is evolution supports the 10% myth. I clicked the wrong button on this one. My bad. But no, it does not. Our brain develops, there's no evidence, to be honest. I mean, that one's quite similar to the last one. We don't feel 10% of the potential. All of the brain is used. A lot of it comes down to this sort of like equipment we use to judge brain flow and activity hasn't been that good, and it's only shown really active parts. So, yep, we're always using all of our brain, no matter what. The brain is active in all areas. Yep, absolutely. There's no part of the brain which is dormant, and the same. So yeah, apologies for that one, but these things have been proven. Oh, sometimes the brain rewires itself after injury, so it shows how it is adaptable. Absolutely, it is very plastic. And for instance, people who have to have the hemispheres kind of detached due to seizures will often rewire itself. It's why people who lose their sight can often improve other senses. Don't get me wrong, it's not like Daredevil, you become blind and then suddenly you're a superhero, but your brain does rewire and it does put those same resources in other places. Oh, Chris says, my dad has cerebral small vessel disease. He seems to be constantly developing new neural pathways to healthier areas and getting better in some areas of his life. Yeah, and that's definitely true. But with always, you can see how if you were to take that idea and run with it, you could see how it could get out of hand, that you automatically become the superhero Daredevil, when no, it's just your brain will rewire itself. It's quite a slow, gradual process, but that it does have truth into it. All right, next, let's look at the left brain, right brain myth. So again, for those of you who haven't heard of it, one side of the brain means you're a creative type of person. The other side means you're more analytical. So is there more activity on one side than the other? So on this little brain, if you're able to, put a little pin on the side of the brain you think is considered the creative hemisphere. What part of the brain is most active if you are an artist, an out-of-the-box thinker, mostly neurodivergent? Let's see. I mean, I'm going to give a quick spoiler. This isn't true, but this is what you might hear in everyday life where people mention it all the time. Okay, we got dots on both the left side and the right side, which is interesting considering there's not an overall consensus. All right, at the moment, the right side is winning by 1. Let's have a look. And, ooh. Oh, it's, the right side. So the creative hemisphere is based on the debunked idea that creativity is a right brain function. Research shows creativity involves the whole brain. Really interesting, because like I said, things are balanced in a grain of truth. So what is the truth here? Well, when you are doing certain activities, there may be a slight more activation in one side or the other, but the other side is 100% active. It's not like one side goes to sleep, or I just need to really work on training the right side of the brain rather than the left side. You train them at the same time. And how is this proven? Well, let's go under a good old FMRI machine, those things where you go, when you're on those big circular domes. And here you can see when an activity was taking place that was creative. You can see on the left side, the dots are there, and on the right side, the dots are there. And the red dots is activity of the neurons kind of firing and doing their job. So absolutely, there's activity in both brains, and you are not left or right-sided. You are both. So myth debunked. Now, now we know it's debunked, we can look at how other myths have grown from the back of that myth. So something which is always thrown about is that if we stimulate a certain hemisphere, we can enhance creativity. So let's say, you're not very good at art. Well, we want to get that right side thinking and we want to get it thinking fast. So maybe if we breathe through our left nostril, just one side, we're sending air and it will make the right side more active because we're sending more oxygen. That might sound ridiculous, but honestly, a lot of people believe that. Not true. And another thing is brain gym activities that stimulate creativity. Now, this one is kind of doing activities which can kind of get the brain active and allow you to be better at test results. Now, really interesting, even in the UK school education system, doing the brain gym was a very, very common activity that a lot of schools would implement in order to stimulate their students' minds, despite not being backed in scientific evidence. So yeah, you can't stimulate it because also it's not true. Now, let's have a quick ganders at multiple intelligence. What is that, do you say? Well, I'm sure you've heard of people like, for instance, Myers-Briggs or kind of other academics who have said that there are a certain type of learner. So there's this guy called Gardner, and, he's quite well known, but he's also very controversial. So he said There was like 7, sometimes he says 9, depending on what year you ask him, but there's different types of intelligence. It's not just one fits all. Now, these are some of the intelligences that he mentioned. If we say what he's saying is true, what intelligence would you put yourself in? So, would you consider yourself to be predominantly word smart, which is linguistic? Are you more of a math smart kind of person, good with reasoning and logic? What about physically smart, so kinesthetic when it comes to movement and maybe sports? Maybe you're really good at music. Maybe you're very good with your interpersonal skills when it talks about people, or maybe you're very good at self-reflection and understanding yourself. Now, it seems a nice idea, right? If we can work out which one of these very simple black and white categories we fall into, we're able to tailor our learnings and help understand ourselves better. But we need to think, where does this research come from? Is this wishful thinking, or is it just pie in the sky and doesn't mean anything? Sorry to say to Mr. Gardner, it doesn't look like it's true. There's something called the G factor, which is like a knockoff of the X factor, and it's a large part of what intelligence is. Essentially, human beings have general intelligence. So on this screen, I want you to rank your skills. Are you really good at spatial awareness? Are you kind of very good at speed? Do you have a great vocabulary, a good general knowledge? How's your working memory? And what you need to appreciate is there's a difference between being good at something and having a distinct, unique advantage to that area. So this image here is quite a useful one. It's the G thing for general intelligence. So everyone has intelligence, right? We all have a good general amount. So all kind of so good at maths and speed and vocabulary. But as you see how some of these dots go out further and some are more inwards. Some skills we are naturally better at than others, and some we are naturally worse. But it's not to the extent that we have a certain type of intelligence. Every human being have a general level of intelligence, and then it's how we practice and hone things in, which can determine how much they go out. Oh, Sanya says, what is spatial skills? So this is, for instance, knowing kind of distance, being able to navigate the world around you, often kind of moving in 3D space. I think like motor coordination type skills. But if we see here, can see everyone's different, but we all have a general amount of skill. So you might say, for instance, "Oh, I'm not very good at maths." You might not be very good at maths, but you are still able to do maths. It's not like you were born not being able to do it. We grow due to our social environments, what we do at the level of teaching we get, the environment we grow up in. These can all influence the type of areas that we put more cognitive effort into. It doesn't mean at all that, for instance, you are a physically smart person. Your DNA means that you are going to be better at sports. Or if you're a of people's person, it's something which is inherently built inside you. It's something that you develop and you can grow upon, but everyone starts off with the same chips to begin with. So this is kind of the theories we're looking at nowadays. Here are a few other myths about IQ tests. And once again, tell me if they're true or if they're false. So we've got IQ test results equal test taking ability. So if you're good at an IQ test, you're good at taking an exam. Or IQ tests measure innate intelligence. So pure intelligence, like on one certain form of it, do they measure it? IQ tests are fixed and unchangeable. If you get one IQ test, that's your score for life. IQ tests are culturally biased, meaning that they're not fair depending on your background. If you're white and male, and if you're any other background, you're not going to get an equal result. And lastly, IQ tests are the sole indicator of intelligence. If you get a high IQ test, congratulations, you're officially smart. Those are the things that we see on day to day. Oh, what do we got here? How does dyscalculia and dyslexia fall into that example? Well, they are the difficulty when it comes to how you learn, not that you are inherently bad at it. So, for instance, if you have dyscalculia, which is related to maths, and dyslexia, which is related to reading, it doesn't mean that you are inherently bad at them. It means the way you learn and retain the information is different to those who do not have those conditions. So, in theory, if you are taught in the way that your brain prefers to learn in and you're taught in a more inclusive style, you absolutely have every potential in order to be successful in those areas. For example, Albert Einstein was often cited as being neurodivergent. I can't prove that, but it's an example of how you can be great in something even though you might have a condition. But yeah, really good question. I'm glad you pointed that out. All right, let's see what we got here. So the first one is false, true, false, true, false. So IQ tests equal test taking ability. Not true. If you have a good IQ test, it doesn't mean you're definitely going to be good at taking exams. Two different skill sets. IQ tests measure innate intelligence. This is actually true because IQ tests do measure a certain type of intelligence. It doesn't measure all intelligence, but what it is measuring is a type of intelligence. So they're not completely useless. They actually do have some real merit to them. But I think we kind of put them on a pedestal. IQ tests are fixed and unchangeable. Not true. You can change your IQ, but it's not easy. When you say you're not going to study really hard and your IQ is going to skyrocket, there's like a margin. It can kind of go me, but it's not dramatic, but it can be changed. IQ tests are culturally biased. Yeah, unfortunately so. They were created with, you guessed it, a Western white view, and different cultures and backgrounds who experience or see intelligence in a different light are not factored into it. For instance, if you're more emotionally intelligent than than an IQ intelligence, that isn't going to be measured. A lot of people think maybe females are more emotionally intelligent, not because of any particular inherent reason, but probably due to expectations from society that their scores would be lower. So if you look at are men or women smarter, well, the IQ test isn't great for that because it's not a fair representation. And lastly, IQ tests are not the kind of definition of smart. They show one element of intelligence. And that's quite similar to those with autism, to be honest. If you judge intelligence by only a few metrics, you're going to create the haves and the haves not. But if you see it in a more three-dimensional view, you realize we're all smart. It's just how we display that intelligence. The next thing that I find really interesting is the reasons why people with high IQ live longer. I know, and this is a fact. If you have a high IQ, you're going to live longer. Now, doesn't this again sound a little bit, oh, well, surely we should be more smarter. It's better. Well, let's dive deep into that again, because again, some myths are true. So on here, I want you to rank what you think are the main reasons why people who have a high IQ are more likely to live to 100 compared to us poor paupers who have a lower IQ are most likely to probably die in their 80s. Why do you think? It's a really interesting kind of look, to be honest. This is a little graph which kind of shows you that the risk of death goes a lot higher the lower your IQ is. Okay, okay, brilliant. What do we have here? We've got genetics may develop both healthy brains and bodies. Yep, that's a really interesting one. So essentially, if you've got good genetics, which kind of allow you to have a really healthy brain, you'll also have a healthier body because both are connected. That seems to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? We've got low IQ can equal unhealthy behaviors. If you struggle with day-to-day life, you're more likely to do reckless behaviors. You're less likely to overthink things, which can put you in risky behaviors, equaling a greater likelihood of death. High IQs can lead to a job with health benefits. So yeah, I guess that makes sense. If you have a high IQ, you're not guaranteed a good job. I know many, many smart people who struggle with employment, but maybe you're more statistically likely. And if you get a really good job, you might get one that has health benefits, which means you're able to live longer. Low IQs might reflect childhood poverty, which affects life. See, that's another interesting one. You might have had a really difficult childhood, which could have affected early development, which later during life leads to further health implications. So as you can see, while some things are true, they're not black and white, and there's a lot more deeper levels to them than you would initially think. Well, Chris says, I have a high IQ, but clash with rubbish managers. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting thing. Again, high IQ doesn't mean that you necessarily have all the skills needed to be successful in every element of your life. It's one small piece of the puzzle, and it's a piece of the puzzle we put way too much emphasis in. Hence, I am not where I think I should be in my career right now. Yeah, it's really true. If you notice a lot of what people say, entrepreneurs and businessmen, is that you should always surround yourself with people smarter than yourself. So typically the CEO is not the smartest person in the team. They're just someone who might have the initiative to get things going. It's people who are maybe a bit lower down the food chain who typically tend to have a higher IQ. Oh, they are likely to get better jobs and earn better, so they have less stress and healthier diets. Absolutely. Well, when I say absolutely, a lot of these things are correlation, not causation. But when you build up a big enough case study, you're able to make a reasonable adjustment with enough studies. All right, moving nicely on. We've got so many to get through. Learning styles. Now, this one was so debated when we did it in with the team. There were people in the team saying, absolutely, I swear by learning styles. And there were others saying, nah, complete BS. But what was it? Are learning styles real or not? Now, for those of you who have not heard about learning styles, it's quite similar to what Howard Gardner said, but this was maybe a bit more kind of simple form. It's saying if you're a student, if you are taught in a particular way, you will do better. So, for instance, would you consider yourself a visual learner, someone who likes to watch movies and see things in face? Are you an auditory person, someone who likes to listen, maybe podcasts or audio? Or are you more of a kinesthetic learner, someone who learns by doing and holding and manipulating things? Now, this seems to make quite sense, to be honest, because if I was to ask most of you what type of learner you are, you'd probably tell me what type of style you prefer to learn in. Now, that is the key word here. It's prefer. It's not inherent. Okay. Oh, nice. So most of the people here, we got visual and kinesthetic. Woohoo! Oh, nice. Chris says kinesthetic for sure. Now, I'm going to challenge you on that because there is a difference between what we are told to be true and what the actual truth is. Remember, there is truth in it, but it's not what we think. So here is a quick true and false again. Tell me what you think. First of all, we have different learning preferences. We typically know our learning preferences. Learning preferences equal different brain types. Oh, April said, I remember doing a session on learning styles at secondary school before I started my GCSE exam. 20 years ago, turns out I'm a visual learner. So the school system was teaching you that. Amy says, what would you class the teach back method as? Because that's really the only way I can commit things to memory and learn them back. Well, that's a good one, Amy. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I'll have to have a think about that. So on this one, the learning styles myth that we all have a learning style is false. And that's because there's been many, many research on it, which shows that students do no better or no worse, depending on how they are taught in these different styles. Now that's interesting, right? Because you think, well, surely there must be a difference, but it's about the wording. So for instance, we have different learning preferences. That is the key word here. We have a preference. We might prefer to learn things via listening. We might prefer to do things by watching. But in terms of, does it mean that some people, because they have an inherent learning style, are destined to learn better via visual? Well, the tests just don't prove that. Doesn't matter. You might enjoy something less, but it doesn't necessarily correlate with better grades. But you can see how when you can take something like this to the extreme, people can get this idea where I'm only going to learn via visual. But when you actually look at it, truthfully, it's about using multiple tactics. So whenever I create these presentations, I try to make visual, auditory, kinesthetic, try and get as many senses engaged as possible. There'll be parts of this that you enjoy more, like maybe you enjoy listening to me, maybe you enjoy interacting, maybe you like looking at the pictures. But ultimately, it's the whole package which creates an environment where you're able to learn effectively. We typically know our learning preferences. No, kinda. I mean, we all know what we like and what we don't like to a certain extent, but not really. And learning preferences equal different brain types. Now, this is the myth in a nutshell. If we have a different learning preference, our brain is wired different. According to the research, there is no difference if we take an MRI scan of someone who considers himself to be a visual learner to someone who considers himself to be a auditory learner. The brain looks exactly the same. So in terms of looking at the brain, there is no difference. Those styles do not exist. But again, just because there's no noticeable differences doesn't mean that as human beings, we still don't have our own preferences. Oh, I retain things better if I can experience them and discussing ideas back and forth. And you know what? Again, this one I do think is the most debated one. You may completely disagree with these findings. Most research will disprove the learning style theories. But if you personally find it beneficial to learn in a particular way, who am I to say otherwise? I think it's more about semantics and the words we use with these myths than necessarily ruling it out completely. Okay, we've got a few moments. Let's crack onto a few more. Smarter people have bigger brains. Okay, so if you're smart, is it like a muscle, the brain? If you work it out, does your brain get bigger? You tell me. Do you think smart people have big brains? Yes or no? Oh, interesting. So 100% of you say no. You're going to hate this. It's true. This is something which is true. If you are from smarter, higher IQ, statistically, you do have a slightly bigger brain. Now, this again is interesting because you're like, oh, this doesn't sound healthy, does it? Well, let's look into it. Why do people who are considered smarter stereotypically have bigger brains? There's a number of factors. So smart people have larger brains, but only slightly, may I say, only slightly, possibly due to neurons. So neurons are those like cables in our brain which connect all the information together. And essentially, if you learn lots, if you are more academic minded, if you kind of push the brain, you will possibly have a greater size. So your neurons in your brain might actually be thicker because they do quite operate like a muscle. Use them and they do form stronger connections. Another possible reason why smarter people might have larger brains is health. If you are healthy, your brain will be full size. And if it's full size, you're likely to be smart. You know, health and intelligence kind of do go together. And lastly, the sheer number. You might have more neuron connections. And this is a really important one. When people say smarter people have more brain cells, no. Brain cells, the number of brain cells isn't the important factor here. The important factor is the number of dendrites. So dendrites are kind of like the arms on the neuron. And these are kind of things that make the connections. So the more arms that each individual brain cell has, the more likely that you'll be able to make these connections and process faster. So the sheer number of brain cells isn't important, but like the arms and the legs of the brain cell. Now that is where the money's at. So as you can see, we do not completely know yet. It's still a correlation, which doesn't mean causation. And that is something that I really want you to take home. So causation is where something looks like it makes sense. You know, I'm just gonna say, it makes sense. But causation is when you got absolutely fact and proof that these two go together and it's not just a coincidence. Oh, Anna says, I was told the same by my daughter's ED, but they don't take into consideration multi-sensory learning when the research says that. It's true, actually. I mean, that area is very contentious and people agree and disagree. It's a bit of a minefield. We've also got no wonder I get headaches. My brain is too big. Absolutely. What are you going to do? So what are some other myths? We've got IQ is inheritable. So if you've got a smart parent, are you also going to be smart? Your IQ can change. So yeah, it might be low. It can get higher. It can get lower. It can go back and forth. And neuroscience has solutions for learning. If we understand neuroscience, we can make sure people can learn better. So what does the boy genius say about it? So IQ is inheritable. You are statistically more likely to be intelligent if your parents were intelligent. Again, it doesn't mean that if your parents weren't, that you are definitely not going to be. It just means there's a greater likelihood. So it is a heritable trait, which means it gets passed down the family. Your IQ can change? Absolutely. you can work on it. But as I said earlier, it's a bit of a wiggle room. So you can get a little bit here, there, a little bit there, but it doesn't change dramatically. But you absolutely can improve. And neuroscience has solutions for learning. No. And this might be like, really? Well, if you actually look at, is there anything which neuroscience has found out in the last few hundred years, which has actually helped us to become better learners? No, it hasn't. This is still an area which requires a lot more research. It has given us insight, but it hasn't exactly taken us much further than we are already. Samuel says, when you say smarter with larger brains, in what way? Does this mean smarter in everything in life? No. I mean, again, intelligence is a hard thing to define, but if we're kind of mainly referring to people who have a stereotypical high IQ, they will have a slightly bigger brain, but it's slightly bigger. Again, I do not think these studies take into consideration things like emotional intelligence. So you are right to question that for sure. But when I say slightly bigger, we mean like only slightly. It's not dramatically. It's not something you're visibly going to be able to see. You can't walk along the high street and see someone with a big head and say they're a genius. Doesn't work like that. Interestingly, Albert Einstein, who is considered one of the smartest people ever, had a slightly smaller brain than the average population. So as you can see, it doesn't always equal. Next question, is neuroscience relevant to education? Do you think this is something that we should be looking at? We talk about all these brain connections. Should we apply this to education? For instance, if we know someone has a lot of neurons, a lot of dendrites, should they be on a different set? Should we be using IQs as a mean of intelligence? It's a difficult question, isn't it? I'm on the fence on this, to be honest, because school was difficult for me. Because I was considered less intelligent, I was in the bottom sets, which kind of capped my potential, which means I wasn't able to improve at a pace I probably could have done. But on the other hand, some of us do need these considerations to be taken into account. And if adjustments are made based on the science of things, we'll actually be able to push the field further. We've got the brain shrinks with dementia. So if Einstein's brain was smaller, might he have had it? I don't think he did have dementia because they actually got his brain and they cut it up into thin little slices and you can actually go and see his brain if you wish. And again, when I say smaller, I mean slightly smaller. But yeah, you're right. Dementia does shrink it, and that's because it shrinks the white and gray matter in your brain. But that is for another day. Brain boosting, and this is the last myth we're going to be busting. Can we makes the brain better really quick? So first of all, have you ever heard of the Mozart effect? And this is if you're pregnant and you're playing like a boombox with Mozart next to the stomach, or your baby's born and just sitting in the crib chilling and you're playing Mozart, it's going to get smarter. So does listening to highbrow music make you smarter? And I honestly believe this. I was just like forcing myself to enjoy Mozart, even though I would have much rather listened to, I don't know, some punk music. Does it make a difference? Some of you say yes. Only a few of you say no. It is not, okay. It doesn't show. It isn't true. They've been shown that listening to Mozart has no effect, but listening to music does have an effect. It's not so much the type of music, it's just listening to music in general has shown to have a positive effect. So yeah, Mozart, sorry man, nothing special about you. Do non-tropics work? Explain a bit more on that. I'm not sure what that means, to be honest with you. It depends on what your brain likes to listen to. Yeah, I think absolutely. You know, for some people, do like Mozart, but for others who do not, doesn't matter. The next one is, did you play brain training games in the past? Oh, non-topics. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. So for instance, you might have played these games on the PC or the DS where you kind of got to say, oh yeah, like do maths every day, do a Sudoku puzzle, and eventually you will get smarter. And look, bam on the box, scientifically proven. Is it true? Is it false? Unfortunately, it's false. These games, people have done many studies where they've done it for a long period of time. They do not improve overall intelligence. Because remember, intelligence kind of develops in different ways. You might get better at that very particular skill. So let's say you're doing Sudoku puzzles. you do get better at Sudoku puzzles, but does that intelligence then translate to when you're doing exams or like doing some paperwork? No. Unfortunately, this type of intelligence hasn't been shown to translate. So brain training games do not boast overall intelligence, unfortunately. I know, I wasted so many years having this guy scream at me, telling me like coriander smells or something. I don't know why he would tell me that. So the effect is near transfer. So it will do a direct translation. This leads to improvements in the task itself. So if you're good at playing your DS game, you're good at playing your DS game. It will not make you better in other areas. There's little evidence to show that these games that you play on your phone will improve overall intelligence. So sorry about playing crosswords. You just get better at playing crosswords. So misleading, essentially I won't go into too much detail, but there was an app which essentially said that we can definitely make you smarter. And they got massively fined because it was proven in court that their claims that doing these activities every day will make you smarter. And there was no science to back it up. So the last one that I want you to have a think whether or not you think it's true or false based on what we've talked about today, and also a few things we have not spoken about. We've got our learning style helps us learn best. So if you know your learning style, you're going to see improvements. Learning styles are dominated by particular senses. So for instance, if you have strong eyes or a good sense of smell, you might find certain things easier to learn than others. Classical music increases reasoning ability. So if you listen to classical, you're going to be better at reasoning. Kids are less attentive after sugary drinks. We are left or right brain. We only use 10% of our brain. So this is going to be good. After all we've spoken about today, what do you believe and what do you not believe? So we've got our learning styles help us learn best. Most of you believe this is true. And again, knowing what you prefer, I would say does have a positive impact. I think with this one, it's more about the type of wording they use. So interesting. Learning styles are dominated by particular senses. Again, while not overly based in science, I would say if you're someone who has healthy eyes, you probably enjoy watching videos. If you've got like short vision, probably not. Classical music increases reasoning ability. No, it does not. But music can stimulate the brain in general. So music can possibly support this, but does it have to be classical? No, it does not. Kids are less attentive after sugary drinks and snacks. Yeah, it's true. And that's based in science in terms of how it affects us and how it gives us a boost. But it doesn't have as much of an impact as I think parents like to make out. Are we right brain, left brain? No, we are not. There's no difference. And we only use 10% of our brain. No, that is not true. Is there a way to exercise the brain and keep it healthier? I, I think by just, healthy eating and exercise and keeping it active helps a lot. But if you want to get good at a particular task, there's no substitute. For instance, if you want to get good at playing Guitar Hero on the Wii isn't going to help. But what are the takeaways? What did we learn from today? We learned that some myths are true. A myth doesn't automatically mean it's false. Myths can be true. It's that the truth has been distorted or lost throughout the process. Myths can come from scientific places. Again, it's not just a Daily Mail that says lies. Sometimes even scientific sources can keep these myths alive. Myths can help shape our evidence standards. So myths aren't all bad. As we learn about this, we can see how can we make our standards more rigid and more respectable, and it can help improve the school system. Some neuromyths are true, basically repeating what I've already said, and it is very hard to change myths. A lot of the myths we spoke about today have been disproven for nearly 100 years, but yet we still believe them. So once something has been created in the consciousness, it gets passed down from generation to generation, particularly because these are myths that we want to be true or very easy for us to remember. Now, that is all we got time for today, but what would you be interested in learning more about? So for instance, there are neuromyths, so many of them. We've got neuromyths that focus on male v female brains, neuromyths around dyslexia, around genetics, parenting, psychiatric disorders, or alternative therapies. Are there any of these which you're very curious and interested to get busted? And let's see what we got for comments. Yeah, the Guardian also tells lies, not just the Daily Mail. It is true. I just use Daily Mail because it's, people are always saying, oh, lies, lies, lies. But as we said, the Daily Mail tells lies, the Guardian tells lies, the Prime Ministers tell lies, everyone does. Now, that doesn't always mean that it's intentional, but they still do. So check your facts, it's important. Okay, oh, dyslexia. All right, dyslexia it is then. Oh, I would like to know more about the neurodivergent brains. We have lots of previous webinars on that, so you should definitely check out our YouTube channel. Now, if any of you thought this is interesting, I would love to read it again or watch it again, or you're interested in the things you already mentioned, because we actually have videos on nearly all of them already, subscribe our channel and you can watch things on the science of dyslexia, understanding how the brain works, learning more about ADHD, things about the neurodivergent brain in terms of why it's different to a neurotypical brain. Do check it out. With all our research, it's all been fact checked. So hopefully this can give a bit more reassurance that it's of realness. But always question everything. Never take anything for granted. Now, our next webinar, if you thought this was interesting, is learning about neurodivergent leadership. So we've talked about these neuromyths, right? And one of these myths is that neurodivergent people make really good leaders. Well, it's true. Statistically, if you look at some of the most successful people in the world, a lot of them have been diagnosed or self-resonate with being neurodivergent. So what is it about thinking differently which has allowed people to succeed? A stat which is often thrown around, which I can't confirm to be honest with you, is 40% of millionaires are dyslexic. Now, we know like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Elon Musk is autistic, Richard Branson is dyslexic. There's got to be some sort of connection, right? So is that correlation or causation? And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at next week. Oh, thank you. I'll definitely be looking out for the YouTube channel. No, thank you. Really appreciate you attending. And if any of you have any follow-up questions or thoughts or concerns, feel free to drop us an email at admin@exceptionalindividuals.com or drop me one personally at nat@exceptionalindividuals.com. Thank you all so, so much for all your lovely comments. And I really hope you enjoyed today and were able to correct some preconceived ideas you have, or at least help you understand them a bit further. But thank you all so much for attending today. And thanks again. Hopefully see you next week. Bye, everyone.